Welcome, everyone. Um, the first thing I would like to do is just to say how grateful I am to be here today, once again, with everyone who often joins these conversations. And so I just really want to thank you for joining today and for being willing to come together and have these courageous conversations. And so there were just a few things I wanted to share, and I'm going to stop my screen for a minute so that we can just all see each other. There we go. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So the first thing I wanted to say was that over the last week, I was experiencing a lot of anxiety because, with everything happening right now in the elections, I wasn't really sure what to present on Sunday, right? Because one, I didn't know how the elections were going to turn out, and the mood, not so much to talk about partisan politics, but really the mood of the people and how it was going to be. And so it was a struggle to pick the theme of the devotional. And another reason was I was really anxious because on the one hand, I didn't want to engage in discussing partisan politics because of my wish to adhere to Baha'i guidance, and also because this is a space hosted by the local spiritual assembly of Durham. And at the same time, I want us to be able to engage with the theme and the content of the discourse that is happening in our society today, without necessarily focusing on the politics themselves, but understanding how the discourse and dominance functions in our society. And so really what's going to be happening today is we're going to be playing this very intricate dance, right? Where we're really focusing on discourse and not so much on partisan politics. And I really want to encourage all of you to dance with me today in this discussion of discourse that is so important. And oftentimes we find in our spaces, in our broader community, and also within Baha'i spaces, where we fear, being accused of causing disunity, or we fear being accused of engaging in really critical discussions. And I didn't want that fear to take over, because I think we really need to be engaging in conversations at a higher level. And so I really, it's my plea to all of you to really have a conversation today that elevates the discourse and analyzes the discourse without digging into the partisan piece of it. Does that make sense for everyone? Okay, all right. So just a few reminders. As you all know, we're going to be experiencing some discomfort, and that's normal, and because of the nature of the conversations. And I just ask you to be mindful in terms of your discomfort, in terms of your bodily discomfort, and how and how you're going to experience this. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that our views are welcome in this space. I think what's important is that we treat everybody with dignity, as we would want to be treated. And so please, I'm not going to say please speak in a respectful manner, because I think that culturally different people, how do you say, I'm forgetting my English word, I'm sorry. Different people express themselves in different ways. So what may seem respectful to one person may not necessarily be disrespectful or to another. But what I would ask is that we all treat each other with dignity, because we're all noble beings. And then lastly, because of the dynamics of Zoom and how it functions, I would also ask that you don't use chat to engage in deep conversations and ask questions in the chat room. What I would hope is that you hold on to those questions and that you bring them to the conversation, so that we can really have a rich and engaging conversation within the space and not in the chat. All right. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and we can start the presentation. So the reason why I picked this this topic, which is willful ignorance and our quest for justice, is because there's been a lot of debate happening in the discourses that we're hearing in society right now, especially in the US. And so I wanted to start with this video that most of you have probably already seen by Eddie Glaude, and then we can go from there.
You know, America's not unique in its sins as a country. We're not unique in our evils, to be honest with you. I think where we may be singular is our refusal to acknowledge them and the legends and myths we tell about our inherent, goodness to hide and cover and conceal so that we can maintain a kind of willful ignorance that protects our innocence. See, the thing is that when the Tea Party was happening, we were saying, pundits, oh, it's just about economic populism. It's not about race. When people knew, social scientists were already writing that what was driving the Tea Party were anxieties about demographic shifts, that the country was changing, that they were seeing these racially ambiguous babies on Cheerios commercials, that the country wasn't quite feeling like it was a white nation anymore. And people were screaming from the top of their lungs, yo, this is not just simply economic populism. This is the ugly underbelly of the country. See, the thing is this, and I'll say this and I'll take the hit on it. There are communities that have had to bear the brunt of America confronting, white Americans confronting the danger of their innocence. And it happens every generation. So somehow we have to kind of, oh my God, is this who we are? And just again, here's another generation of babies. Think about it, a 2-year-old had his bones broken by 2 parents trying to shield him from being killed. A woman who has been married to this man for as long as I've been on the planet almost, lost her husband. For what? And so what we know is that the country has been playing politics for a long time on this hatred. We know this. So it's easy for us to place it all on Donald Trump's shoulders. It's easy for us to place Pittsburgh on his shoulders. It's easy for me to place Charlottesville on his shoulders. It's easy for us to place El Paso on his shoulders. This is us. And if we're going to get past this, we can't blame it on him. He's a manifestation of the ugliness that's in us. I've had the privilege of growing up in a tradition that didn't believe in the myths and the legends because we had to bear the brunt of them. Either we're going to change, Nicole, or we're going to do this again and again, and babies are going to have to grow up without mothers and fathers, uncles and aunts, friends, while we're trying to convince white folk to finally leave behind a history that will maybe, or embrace a history that might set them free from being white. Finally.
What else?
Lord help us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the
There we go. I'm going to be digging in a minute, but maybe I would like to take 2 or 3 initial reactions to the video, and then we'll come back to it at the end of the presentation. If you can raise your hand, I see Kathy Lee clapping. Yes, Jackie.
Gratitude that he spoke the truth.
Okay, gratitude. Fran?
I think he really clearly, specifically stated a truth. But I think our challenge as Baha'is is learning how can we counter that? And I think that's your point of this session, which that's what I long to learn. How do we as Baha'is elevate the conversation or turn that around and help us transform ourselves so that we can embrace and love one another and be able to look beyond all the confusing rhetoric.
Thank you, Fran. I think Chuck had his, was going to say something. He unmuted himself. Chuck, did you want to say something? I'm unmuting you.
No, I was trying to find the raise hand button. I found it, but I'm okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Melanie?
Yeah, I think it's also about, I'm sorry, let me share my video. I think it's not only within the Baha'i community, it's within our families. I am in a family of a lot of siblings because my father was into eugenics a half a century ago or more. And my siblings, you know, we're all over the map. Some are deeply entrenched in these myths of our history, and some of us are doing our best to awaken to the reality. And I think that we need to commit to having these conversations in our families as well as elsewhere.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? I'll take one last comment before we continue. Yes, Bart, I see your hand.
Well, I was I'm a fan of that speaker and have read and a fair amount. Of course, he's a scholar on James Baldwin as well. But I was moved by his passion, but also struck by how the journalist seemed to, my judgment is, he seemed to have wanted to have a prepared follow-up so that they didn't appear ignorant or something. And it was just, I felt a little bit of whiplash from that clinical follow-up question, what else? When a person had just poured out his heart about the situation, just the stony silence and frozen expressions of the people just shocked me. And then the other thing that came up for me was how he is so right about this not being about one administration, because the reason people have to continue to become woke is because the history is the story as told by the victors. And so all of this history is not being told. Sorry about that.
We love
Really
children.
exciting. It's just happened on another video, I think. But I'm reading a book right now called The Half That's Never Been Told. And it's absolutely inexcusable that Americans do not know the true history of this and are therefore subject to lies and heroic mythologies about our history.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that. And one thing that struck me, and I just want to follow up with what Bart was sharing, was the clinical response of what else? Because in a way, you know, the Universal House of Justice and the National Spiritual Assembly is asking us to listen, and to listen deeply to the experiences and the stories of people of color. And it definitely felt like he wasn't heard by the interviewer. Is that what we say? Interviewer. Okay, sorry. And what does that mean, right? In the history of this country where we're not being heard, it was right there on the screen of how people of color are not being heard. Yes, someone was going to jump in. And then we're also going to dig into the content a little bit more. So thank you for sharing. Catherine, did you want to? I thought I saw someone unmute themselves. Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot. Anybody? I thought I heard something. Okay, all right. So let's go ahead. Thank you all for sharing. And the first thing I'd like to do, let me just find my PowerPoint. Here we go. is to just talk about, and in some presentations I've talked about this idea of willful ignorance. Another way that it's used in the literature is called white ignorance, and I'm going to focus on that for just a few minutes. And we're going to come back to the video and just explore some of the questions, some questions that I have for discussion. And then we're going to move on and talk about some of the Baha'i writings that talk about leaders and what those should look like for the future. So the dictionary definition, and the reason why I want to focus on this term white ignorance is because I think what Dr. Glaude is getting at in the video is that generationally we're perpetuating willful ignorance or white ignorance that happens in the United States over and over again. So from an academic perspective, we talk about it as ideology. And I just want to talk about Charles Mills because he does a really good job of defining what this white ignorance is. And so the actual definition of ignorance is this idea of lack of knowledge or information. But we're going to find out that white ignorance has nothing to do with this idea of ignorance as lack of knowledge or information. And so Charles Mills talks about this contract that is formed in our society between white people, right? That present a way of the world that ignores racial subordination. And so I just want to talk about that for a minute. So we all have heard that we shouldn't say that I don't see color, for example, right? We know that that's just not appropriate to say, or to say a phrase like, we are not equal. However, I just want us to think about why that is. Why is it that we say that? And what is the purpose of repeating a phrase like that? So from one perspective, people would say, well, I don't want to appear racist, right? So I want to say automatically, I don't see color so that people think that I'm not racist. Or what if someone says, we are all equal? I don't understand what the big deal is. You know, slavery happened to, you know, however many centuries ago. And now that the civil rights movement happened, we are all equal. And so what I want to get at underneath, and what Charles Mills is talking about, is this racial contract between whites whose purpose is to ignore racial subordination. So it's not so much that we're just saying we don't see color or we are all equal, is the intent and purpose under it, right? Which is to ignore the actual racial subordination that is still happening in our society today. And so that's part of this racial contract. And so as we go through our lives, so for example, you know, we talk about the different stereotypes that are perpetuated to perpetuate this image that it's people aren't, for example, in terms of job discrimination, right? Oh, Black people are lazy, for example. That is an actual stereotype and myth that is perpetuated in order to suppress, right, the actual reality, which is this racial subordination. And so part of this racial contract is to feign ignorance of things. Oh, I didn't know that, I'm sorry, right? But it's not just at the individual level, but it's this collective groupthink that happens that we are taught to do over time. And so I just want to play a video of someone, there we go, a professor. I'm just going to stop share so I can play the video, who explains white ignorance. Hold on one second, sorry. Okay, I'm ready. Can everyone see the screen? Okay.
How do I conceptualize white ignorance? Well, I take this concept from the political philosopher Charles W. Mills, who's written a book chapter called White Ignorance, but then also a book called The Racial Contract. And in his book, The Racial Contract, Charles Mills talks about how in Western societies, but in kind of in all white dominated societies, there's this thing called the racial contract, whether explicit or implicit, that all white people enter into in order to sustain and reproduce white supremacy. And white ignorance is a key facet of this idea of the racial contract, because what he says that that white ignorance is a kind of epistemology. It's a knowledge production, and it's a power relation enacted through knowledge. And so in order to accept an idea that people of color are inferior, or in order to accept the idea of colonial plunder or exploitation or expropriation, in order for people to kind of get on with their life, they have to have frameworks for understanding the world. And those frameworks, Charles Mills argues, are based on this idea of ignorance. So an ignorance of misunderstanding the experiences of people of color, ignorance and misunderstanding, a willful and calculated misunderstanding of the racialized social order, and a misunderstanding as to why some groups are disproportionately poor and over-concentrated in low-skilled, low-paid work. Part of the problem with
Oh, here we go. Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. So Charles Mills, at the beginning of one of his chapters, has this poem that I think is very powerful, and I just want to share it with you. And then we're going to dig into the topic and really have a conversation about it. So just bear with me just for a minute. If you noticed in the video, what she was getting at is that this idea of white ignorance is knowledge, right? It's not this dictionary definition that ignorance is this absence of knowledge or lack of knowledge, but really white ignorance is a type of knowledge, it's a type of racial contract, it's a type of epistemology that is perpetuated within our circles. And so Charles Mills says, white ignorance, it's a big subject. How much time do you have? It's not enough. Ignorance is usually thought of as the passive averse to knowledge, the darkness retreating before the spread of enlightenment. But imagine an ignorance that resists. Imagine an ignorance that fights back. Imagine an ignorance militant, aggressive, not to be intimidated. An ignorance that is active, dynamic, that refuses to go quietly. Not at all confined to the illiterate and uneducated, but propagated at the highest levels of the land, indeed presenting itself unblushingly as knowledge. So before we move on to the questions, I just want to open it up for 5 minutes to any questions about the content or any comments. Yes, Sue.
Well, two questions came to mind, or maybe three, while I was listening to them shared. Well, why does a person choose? That's kind of stunning to consider. What happened to his natural curiosity? This willful ignorance we're talking about is a trauma response. And when you call on us to be noble beings, the noble being in a person who chooses to remain ignorant or and how do we retrieve the natural curiosity and the sense of safe support to carry on, to know and to learn what distinguishes us as human beings? Those are just my reflections.
Thank you for sharing that. You were cutting in and out just a little bit, but I think we got the majority of the points, which is that is this idea that we should think about it as trauma, and to think about the constructive nature as human beings of what is expected, or what we should strive for. Did I pick that up, or was this that?
That was a good synopsis.
Wonderful. Melanie has her hand up.
I love that willful ignorance is a trauma response. That's so true. I think it's not all about loss of curiosity. It's also this ignorance presenting itself as knowledge. We present knowledge to every grade, elementary school through high school, and then into college, that isn't truth. We present, false stories of the interaction with Native peoples. We present false stories about slavery being, kind. We present glorified stories of enslaved people and the slave the forced work encampments that we call plantations. So it's part of this presenting itself as knowledge is a damage that we do to our children's curiosity by filling their need for knowledge with falsehood.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Melanie. Christina?
Hi there. I think that the white ignorance is just one of the many symptoms of white supremacy. It's just a worldview. And I'm not in any way apologizing for it. I'm just saying that when people have grown up with a worldview, when you challenge their worldview, most people will become defensive. And unfortunately, in a climate that encourages the idea that an opinion is as important as a fact, and that, that is then you just get into these discourses that are unfruitful because it becomes belligerent. And once there's belligerence, there's no listening going on. So I think the whole concept I think it's very true what the speaker was saying, that, or what was written as well, that white ignorance is not ignorance, it's refusal. And I agree also that it would be very nice if it were more of a let's get back to curiosity. But I think that we're far away from sort of, I don't say childlike in any negative way, but just the idea of being curious, which is a wonderful thing to be as an adult or a child or anybody, but that we're not even there. We're at a people hunkering down and not wanting to change their worldview or give even consideration to another worldview, because they feel it attacks the way they are, and in some ways it does. So, just some thoughts.
I know Kathy Lee had her hand up. Anybody else that I'm missing? Kathy Lee?
I'm going back to Professor Eddie Glaude's comments, and that is, if white people embrace the entire truth of the history of our behavior, particularly with African Americans, it would say so much about who we have been and who we are. And I think most white people want to keep the myth going because the truth has us taking a look at what that means about me, what that means about us. as white people. And I think to go there means that white people would have to say, we've been cruel, we've been exploitative, we have not been good people. And the whole myth of staying away from the truth of history, I think one of its purposes, may not be the only purpose, is to make sure we can still look ourselves in the mirror and say, I'm a good person. And when we embrace the truth of our history and our patterns of interaction with people of color, it's clear that we have not behaved as noble beings. We have not behaved as good people. And I think for some people, that's just something they don't even want to get close to addressing. And for people who have looked at it, I mean, some of the literature that's available, when you read the real history, it's so incriminating that as a white person, I have to own the history. I have to own what people who look like me have done. And then I have to ask myself, how can I cleanse myself? How can I make sure I don't continue the perpetuation of that behavior or the mindset that it's okay to behave that way to any group of people? And I think getting down to what this says about us as a group, what this says about me as a person, is it really requires humility and courage to take a look at it and be willing to face it and then decide how I want to respond to this reality.
Thank you for sharing. The one thing I wanted to, Chuck, I'll get to you in a second. The one thing I see you. The one thing I wanted to share as well as we dig into this conversation and dig into these questions is there's definitely a continuum in terms of white ignorance. And so, you know, he uses, Dr. Glaude uses the term willful ignorance in the video, which has levels, right, on a continuum. We've seen political leaders who definitely practice very strong willful ignorance, and we also see some, you know, members of the general population who perpetuate white ignorance in this racial contract without necessarily being fully cognizant of what they're doing because they don't take the time to really think about it. And so I just want to differentiate this idea that willful ignorance can have different magnitudes in terms of the spectrum of where we sit at. I don't know if that makes sense, but there are different levels, right? Some who blatantly deny, you know, scientific facts and just facts in general, and then those who perpetuate it more subtly within our society. Chuck, did you want to add something, and then we'll move on to the questions?
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm reluctant to add one more white voice to this piece of the discussion. As one who falls into willful ignorance as a white man, who carries it with me and still struggles to discover it and uncover it and eliminate it. My real concern is how is willful ignorance expressed in the Baha'i community, in our institutions, in our consultations. Also being fully aware that this willful ignorance also is wrapped up with patriarchal masculinity. It's not just about race. And I'm curious, as I am not a canary in the mine. There's so much that goes past me that I don't see or know. And I'm very interested to hear from people of color on the call who might could offer some insights on this if they wish to.
Thank you, Chuck. I second his call, if anybody is willing.
Also third that call.
I would say so.
So I also don't want to feel like we're putting people on the spot. So I was wondering if we could go into the first question. And the first question is really, I think, is going to get at maybe at Chuck's request as well. So the first question is, I think we have a good grasp of what willful ignorance is at this point. And if not, we can still continue talking about it. But I was wondering if we could share some examples of how it is enacted in our daily lives. How have you witnessed it, observed it, and its impact, and the impact that it has? Yes, Mom?
So I think you know very well that there was quite some time that I was practicing willful ignorance. I was out of the country, and you kept telling me, "Mom, you've got to look at this. You've got to read." And I kept saying, "Well, you know what? You know, you're preaching to the choir. You know, I lived in Africa for 17 years. Why do I need to read? This stuff is really painful." And I had really no understanding at all of the pervasive reach of white supremacy and systemic racism. And so it was about 2 or 3 years. And it finally, coming back to the States, made me actually delve in and start reading. But that was willful ignorance for quite some time.
Thank you for sharing that. I tried, y'all. I tried to have her read so many books. The new Jim Crow specifically. We had many discussions. Okay, Sue?
Right. Well, when I think of the term willful ignorance, I think of a book, it's a classic book in the mental health field, especially dealing with sexual trauma. And the title is Thou Shalt Not Be Aware. So willful ignorance to me is saying, I don't want to be aware. I don't want to know. And it's frightening to face truth. It's frightening to face truth. So denial sets in. And actually, we have an epidemic of Alzheimer's, maybe especially in the Western world, Alzheimer's, which is essentially saying, I don't want to be aware. I don't want to know. I don't want to look at this. I don't want to talk about this. Go outside and play. So I think truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues. It's the foundation. Truthfulness isn't even a virtue, it's a foundation. So if we don't even have a foundation on which to build a house, then there's no progress. There's just no progress until we're willing to be truthful. So how I see it in my daily life is when I want to talk about something and people change the subject, or they begin to gaslight, or just distract in various different ways.
Thank you, Sue. I think this idea of truthfulness will lead us to our second question, which is when we're talking about, sorry, that's 3 questions. Hold on 1 second. There we go. The second question is, what is it about the act of blaming Donald Trump that perpetuates willful ignorance and ultimately reinforces dominance? So let's just think about that for a minute and think about it within the framework of truthfulness. And what is it about this act of blaming Donald Trump that perpetuates this willful ignorance and ultimately reinforces dominance? So I'd love to explore this question a little bit.
Okay, I'll take a stab at just an idea about this. That he's so blatant often in his rhetoric that it makes people who are less aware of their microaggressions and less aware of the subtle ways that we all participate. It makes it just easy to project, and he's looking at things as good and evil, but you know, racist, non-racist. It's the whole concept that it's not one or the other, but we're all somewhere on the spectrum. So it's easy for us to blame Donald Trump because he's so clear in his ignorance, and then it makes us feel like we're good people. We're okay because we're not we don't do and say the things he says and does. So we're not racist, and we're not contributing to systemic racism or injustice. So it's to me, it's about degree and how easy it is when somebody's clearly, participating in behaviors that are unjust for us not to think about our own contributions.
So can we get at this idea of goodness? So I know I saw Bart raising his hand, and I see Fran. I'll get to you all in just a second. I just want to dig into this idea of goodness that you were talking about, right? That we see ourselves as good, and we see Donald Trump as bad. So Dr. Glaude kind of talked about that, elucidated to that in his video when he talked about this idea of inherent goodness, right? We're raised to believe in this inherent goodness, and so to suddenly realize that we're racist means that it kind of like contradicts these beliefs that we were raised with into thinking that we're inherently good. And so maybe can we just dig in a little bit deeper with that concept and what that looks like?
Well,
I sometimes your hands raised. Fran, yes.
well, I think because of as we are trying to transform as Baha'is or as spiritual beings, we become more cognizant, I think, of our inherent goodness. I think this whole thing of blaming Donald Trump, he's just an example. What I was gonna say is we as humans tend to always play the blaming game. I remember years ago recognizing that as long as I blame somebody else for something, then I'm not taking responsibility for myself. And he's just a good example because it's so apparent as far as the blaming part because of what he says, and I along with what Kim was saying. But I think back to your point about inherently good, I think that's where we all are longing to be. That's part of our real self. And it all goes along with all this whole conversation about willful ignorance that we as humans tend to perpetuate. And I think the only way we're going to rise above it is through our spiritual transformation and studying in the messages that Baha'u'llah has given us for how to do that.
Thank you. Bart, I know I saw your hand up a minute ago. Did you have a comment? I don't know if you...
Well, the one thing that came up for me is that Donald Trump is only the latest. I mean, we can go back and we can think of Wallace, we can think of other individuals, David Duke, we can think of these individuals. But what comes up for me is these individuals all exist within a system, a governmental system, and it almost serves as you say here, it perpetuates it because it allows all the focus to be placed on a single, all the responsibility to be replaced on a single person. And that single person, regardless of whether their behavior is laudable or deplorable, it doesn't all fall on them. And so when I think about Shoghi Effendi saying that this country in Priceless Pearl, Ruhiya Khanum recounts a time when Shoghi Effendi calls this country the most corrupt government in the world. And it does not sit with her at all. And he can tell that it doesn't. And she said, surely Shoghi Effendi, you don't mean that, as she scans the governments around the world. And he said that I do. And she was still filled with consternation, and it was apparently showing on his face. And he said, swallow it, it's good for you. And so when we look at this system that is allowed for the current situation to even exist, we cannot blame Donald Trump and then not look at the systematic gerrymandering that occurs through the use of computer algorithms right now to prevent true representation from occurring. We cannot blame Trump and not look at the incestuous relationship that exists between big business and corporations and government, and everything is a wink and a nudge. And you have corporations actually literally in the form of ALEC and others generating the legislation that will benefit them and resign millions of people to suffering or less quality of life. We can't look at it unless we look at what's happened to the industrialization of our history books, and the fact that high school textbook company after high school textbook company has been bought out and is now owned by smaller and smaller companies, many of them residing in Texas, and they are actively controlling the historical narrative of this country so that there is no opportunity to awake to the truth, because we're all continually being fed the sedatives of lies. And so it's the unique person that actually can wake up from this. And so that's all I have to share about that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I see Sue has her hand up, and then I just want to share after Sue shares, I just want to say that there are really a lot of wonderful voices on the call, and I'm going to put all the questions up, but I just also want to just state that if sometimes we can, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if we can hear some diverse voices, I think we would greatly benefit from it. So if you are inspired, please raise your hand and I'll move you up the list because we want to hear from you.
How do you raise your hand?
Oh, there you go. You can just share, please go ahead. I think you raise your hand. Oh, how do you raise your hand? I think you go to participants and at the bottom there's a raise hand button, but you can just go ahead and speak.
Okay, I don't see it, but anyway, I was going to just say that as a Black person, I don't feel that necessarily that we're blaming Donald Trump, but we feel like he perpetuated, as it says here, it's because of his tone and the things that he does, and like ignoring the white supremacist groups and applauding them and things like that, that he helps to reinforce or show that there's a lot of racism in this country. And so it's been hidden for years now, people thinking everything is going well, but now they see that these people are coming out of the woodwork, showing that they have all these racist tendencies, and they feel like he's made it so that the country feels like they can do this now, that they're comfortable in doing whatever they want to do, and perpetuating this willful ignorance that we're talking about.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And so it's not so much this idea of blaming, but really bringing out this idea of how dominance is perpetuated through Donald Trump. Is that what you're hearing?
He's a leader of a country, and yet he's allowing people to be divisive. I mean, he's setting the tone of the country. So he set the tone to say, yeah, you can come out and do these things now. These people don't matter. Black lives don't matter. So, or whatever, brown lives don't matter. Nobody matters but we, the white people. So that's my feel on it.
Thank you so much for sharing. Sue, I know you'll be okay with just holding on for a second. I see Shagun has his hand up.
I know Chuck asked that some other view be expressed. And the other thing that came into my mind is this, when we talk about being good people or noble people, I think the simplest way I can look at it is just how do I treat my brother? How do I treat my sister? How do I treat my mom? How do I treat my dad or any one of those people we love? And then ask yourself, am I treating these other people the way I would want to be treated? And those are the simple questions. And if we talk about being a noble person, what Baola is telling us about being noble is deeper than whatever we say every day. Noble is being mindful of your relationship with everybody else. And I think it's even in the Bible. You know, it's mentioned that, do unto others. It's even not in the Bible, in every one of the religion. Do unto others as you wish that they do to you. And are we doing that? So if I'm going to call myself a good person, am I selective in what I'm being good about? And I think that's a question that we are asking all the time. So don't tell me you good person when you're not following. I mean, every religion mentioned about being good to anybody else who comes your way. And am I doing that? And if I ask myself every day, so don't select which one of them you want to, am I doing this in every, and if I'm not doing it then, you have to account to your creator because it's not anybody else but your creator who asked you to do this. And if you're not doing that, then you have a whole lot of accounting to do. So I think that's the simplest way I could address it, that, if you want to hear my view, ask yourself, any one of us, every time, am I doing this? Would I like anybody to do this to my grandma, to my mom, to my sister, to my brother? And if you say no, then don't do it. Or else you have to account one day. So I think that's what I want to say about that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Shagun. That's really, it's inspiring to hear you say that and to always come back to this idea of thinking of everyone as family and realizing if I treat you differently than I would treat my family, then we shouldn't act that way. Really inspiring. Thank you. Any other diverse voices? Sue, do you want to go ahead, and then if others want to jump in?
Okay. Well, when it says, what is it about the act of blaming? And I'm just going to put a blank there, like insert anybody's name. I mean, Donald Trump becomes the poster boy for America's denial of self-responsibility and self-accountability. It's so easy to blame somebody else. It's not my fault. He did this, she said that, instead of taking personal responsibility. So it's ego. It's the lower self, the lower nature, which is our immaturity. That's where we are. We're right on the cusp of progressing from an immature state of being to a more mature state of being, which is to says, I did it. Did I do that? Yeah, I did do that. And then just be responsible for that and correct it. I think there's a lot of fear of the blame and the shame and the guilt and the fault and the you're going to burn in hell forever and ever, that we've learned from earlier models of religion. And at this point in our development in our conscious minds, it's a matter of saying taking responsibility. Did I do that? Do I do that? Yeah, I do. So change it, change it. So I think we are inherently good. I think that's to relieve all the fear that people have. We are inherently good. Inherently good means we are noble creatures, but we aren't acting like it. So then it's a matter of, when do I drop down from my noble essence to my lower nature, in which I act in a shameful manner, and just simply change that. It's really a matter of lifting myself up, elevating myself to my highest possibility. And then I just want to conclude with saying, blaming others. How do we perpetuate, how do we reinforce dominance by blaming others? Because blaming others empowers them. We're actually giving power to people who are, quote, to blame, instead of taking our power back and saying, I'm responsible. That empowers me.
Thank you, Sue. Uncle Charles, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to?
Oh, I just had a couple of thoughts. Not sure if it necessarily applies to the question that's there, but we keep talking about the word act. I mean, everything is about act, you know, even the fact that we come and have the discussion, that's an act. But it's a very easy act because we sit down and we're sitting in our homes and we're talking, you know, we're sharing information, and that's wonderful to do that. But ultimately, unless it leads to some kind of action outside of the discussion, then it's maybe wasteful. For instance, like you know, at the core of what we're talking about here is like, you know, who do we love? I mean, really, it's about love. Who do we love? And so, like, if an action that one could take is, for instance, like, if I'm white, I could take a sheet of paper and on that paper, write down the name of 2, 3 people who we truly love. You know, and maybe on the other side of that, to define what love looks like. It means they know when I'm having a financial crisis. They know about who I truly love. You know, they know about the ills of my family. They know about whatever it is that makes one love someone. Write those things down, and then list the people who that's shared with, and see what they look like. And if they all look the same as oneself, if they're all white, then it's saying, okay, why is it that way? Because that's not normal. I mean, it's not normal. It doesn't happen just normal. That's an act that one chooses, whether being aware of that or not. But I think it's that kind of level that one has to get to. And then if I don't have Black people over there, then why? And then do a truly honest assessment as to why. I mean, truly look into one's heart. And there's lots of things that we might even realize that are there, but truly look into that. You know, why is it the way it is? And then that's the beginning of changing it. That's the beginning of changing it. I'm sure we all have the time that our lives, we say, oh, I met this person, and we just automatically clicked. You know, why? Why did we automatically click? What was it? You know, and until we can identify at that kind of level, then how can we change it? You know, and like, I don't know if there are people here who are not part of the Baha'i community or not, but like in the Baha'i community, for instance, as well, you know, the person that I love, that I truly respect and care about, and these are my Black friends or my white friends. We know each other at meetings, we know each other because we know where this one lives or maybe where that one lives, you know, but outside of that, I mean, are we really friends? Are we really close? We know what God says, but am I really there? You know, I don't know, I'm just putting it out there. I think we have to give ourselves some direct, daily, targeted actions to judge where we are in this, whether it's with Trump or whomever's in that position, and then we'll be able to bring about change.
That's true.
Thank you so much for that, Charles. It just really makes us think about, and so maybe I think what we could take away from this session, as Charles mentioned, is, you know, when we leave here, making that list and seeing who is it that is on that list and what does that mean, and reflecting on who's in our lives, who's our friends, and then actively and mindfully changing, praying and changing those dynamics that are forming our relationship. Thank you. Jackie, I see your hand up.
Yes, what I was going to say was, I think that it's very easy to blame Donald Trump, who's an extremist, and say, I'm not like that. That's not me. I'm better than that. And that absolves us from looking inside of ourselves to understand how our own ignorance and our own unawareness may be perpetuating racism.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So this idea of looking at extremists, but not necessarily looking at those in our daily lives who don't seem extreme to us, right? Who are also perpetuating that. Thank you. So what I would like to do is to move on and just share some writings from the founder of the Baha'i faith, for those who are joining us who are not Baha'is, and just to imagine, so that we can leave and imagine what our future leaders, what Baha'u'llah is asking our future leaders, what he's tasking our future leaders to be like and to aspire to. And so if it's okay with you, I would like to move the discussion in that direction, and just to read some quotes and maybe have a few final commentaries on it. Are you ready to move on? Yeah, I don't see any head nods. All right, great. There we go. So, Mom, can you read the first slide?
What does Baha'u'llah say about the future leaders of the earth? The great being, wishing to reveal the prerequisites of the peace and tranquility of the world and the advancement of its peoples, hath written, the time must come when the imperative necessity for the holding of a vast and all-embracing assemblage of men will be universally realized. The rulers and kings of the earth must needs attend it, and participating in its deliberations must consider such ways and means as will lay the foundations of the world's great peace amongst men. Such a peace demandeth that the great powers should resolve, for the sake of the tranquility of the peoples of the earth, to be fully reconciled among themselves. Should any king take up arms against another, all should unitedly arise and prevent him. If this be done, the nations of the world will no longer require any armaments, except for the purpose of preserving the security of their realms and of maintaining internal order within their territories. This will ensure the peace and composure of every people, government, and nation.
Can you continue?
We fain would hope that the kings and rulers of the earth, the mirrors of the gracious and almighty name of God, may attain to this station and shield mankind from the onslaught of tyranny. The day is approaching when all the peoples of the world will have adopted one universal language and one common script. When this is achieved, to whatsoever city a man may journey, it shall be as if he were entering his own home. These things are obligatory and absolutely essential. It is incumbent upon every man of insight or understanding to strive to translate that which hath been written into reality and action. One indeed is a man who, today, dedicated himself to the service of the entire human race.
Any thoughts? Maybe just anything that inspires you in what we just read. Talking about hope of what the future should look like. Yes, Kathy.
Well, I find some important principles in these paragraphs for the governance of the entire planet. And one is that the leaders need to come together and seriously deliberate on what's going to create the foundations of peace. So this is projecting into the future a time when there will be peace, and the leaders of the world will be taking it seriously. And the second principle here is about arms and weapons, and that they are to be limited, and a principle of collective security, so that if any one nation aggresses against another, all the nations arise to stop the aggressor, which I think would be, it sounds so simple. And this was practiced in World War II for one of the first times of collective security. And I think that it's a principle that, if applied, would have dramatic consequences for the welfare and the prosperity of the future of the human race.
Thank you. Thank you for that summary, Kathy. That was wonderful. Any thoughts on this before we move on to the next tablet? I wanted to share a few more writings. I just think it's just so beautiful how Baha'u'llah just talks about our future leaders and what we can look forward to when put into action. So I see Bart and then Chuck. Bart, we don't hear you, sorry.
Oh, I was saying, I was asking Chuck to feel free to go ahead, but I was muted.
Okay, Chuck.
Oh, okay. My thoughts were that Baha'u'llah is describing a post-nationalistic world, and the kind of leaders that are required to bring about that great assemblage will be leaders who are not holding their nationality above world citizenship. I thought that really struck me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Bart, did you want to add?
Along those same lines, I was thinking about Shagun and what he shared, and about the golden rule, and how this is not a new concept, but how what we see practicing today is, as Chuck was mentioning, this idea that power and resources, that all of this is finite, that power is a finite thing, and that it must be guarded, when really that runs counter to the, as I understand the Baha'i concept, is power is something to be released amongst a population of people, and then therefore is infinite.
Thank you for sharing that. I've listened to a Brene Brown podcast recently that was talking about the different kinds of power. There's power over, power with. I forget all of the other ones, but the idea that really effective and good leaders are the ones who empower the people, and part of that power is being a servant. You know, part of being a ruler is being a servant to the people. And so rather than thinking of a leader as someone on top of a hierarchy, really thinking of them as serving the people and finding ways to empower them in the work that they do or in their lives. So thank you, Bart. Thank you for that comment as well. I'd like to share the last few paragraphs of another tablet. Let me just make sure I have the right one, and then we can talk about it. Can I get a volunteer to read? Jump on in. Christina?
What does Baha'u'llah say about the future leaders of the earth? We fain would hope that the kings and rulers of the earth, the mirrors of the gracious and almighty name of God, may attain unto this station and shield mankind from the onslaught of tyranny. The day is approaching when all the peoples of the world will have adopted one universal language and one common script. When this is achieved, to whatsoever city a man may journey, it shall be as if he were entering his own home. These things are obligatory and absolutely essential. It is incumbent upon every man of insight and understanding to strive to translate that which hath been written into reality and action. That one indeed is a man who today dedicateth himself to the service of the entire human race.
Thank you. Can I have someone volunteer to read this slide? Sorry, I accidentally repeated that one.
Lay not aside the fear of God, O kings of the earth, and beware that ye transgress not the bounds which the Almighty hath fixed. Observe the injunctions laid upon you in his book, and take good heed not to overstep their limits. Be vigilant that ye may not do injustice to anyone, be it to the extent of a grain of mustard seed. Tread ye the path of justice, for this verily is the straight path.
Thank you. There's one more that I wanted to read. These last two. Hold on. Oh, okay. And I'll go ahead and read this one. We have learned that you are increasing your outlay every year and are laying the burden thereof on your subjects. This verily is more than they can bear and is a grievous injustice. Decide justly between men, and be ye the emblems of justice amongst them. This, if we judge fairly, is the thing that behooveth you and beseemeth your station. Beware not to deal unjustly with anyone that appealeth to you, and entereth beneath your shadow. Walk ye in the fear of God, and be ye of them that lead a godly life. Rest not on your power, your armies and treasures. Put your whole trust and confidence in God, who hath created you, and seek ye his help in all your affairs. Succor cometh from him alone. He succoureth whom he will with the hosts of the heaven and earth. Would you like to read the last slide? I know it's a lot. I have one more slide, which is also inspiring. Yeah? Okay. Bear with me, and then we can come back and talk about all of them together. Examine our cause, inquire into the things that have befallen us, and decide justly between us and our enemies, and be ye of them that act equitably towards their neighbor. If ye stay not the hand of the oppressor, if ye fail to safeguard the rights of the downtrodden, what right have ye then to vaunt yourself among men? What is it of which ye can rightly boast? Is it on your food and your drink that ye pride yourself? On the riches ye lay up in your treasuries? On the diversity and the cost of the ornaments with which ye deck yourselves? If true glory were to consist in the possession of such perishable things, then the earth on which ye walk must needs vaunt itself over you, because it supplieth you and bestoweth upon you these very things by the decree of the Almighty. In its bowels are contained, according to what God hath ordained, all that ye possess. From it, as a sign of his mercy, ye derive your riches. Behold then your state, the thing in which ye glory. Would that ye perceive it, ye could perceive it. Any thoughts? Kathy, I hear you talk. I mean, I don't hear you. I see you're saying something, but I think you're still on mute. Oh, there we go.
I want to make sure if others have something to say that I hold back.
Okay. Christina, I see your hand is still up. I was just wondering if it was from before or if you have something else you'd like to share.
It was from before, sorry.
No worries. I'll stop sharing the screen in a minute. I just wanted to give everyone the opportunity to read the quote. Sue?
Well, I'm just noticing from these readings, there's an implication of a God-centered world society. And that implies an impending interfaith agreement on a world level. I'm thinking of the various many religions that we have on the planet, going back to the beginning: Krishna, Moses, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, the Baha'u'llah. Over thousands of years, we have many religions present on the planet today, and of course then many religious leaders and followers, and we're not necessarily in basic agreement. We're at odds with each other, at issue with each other. Maybe the most holy wars, the most wars in history have been precipitated by religious strife and conflict. So what will bring us to an interfaith agreement? Maybe this is where we start to reorient ourselves to a God-centered society, regardless of the name. The light is the same.
Thank you so much for that point. This idea of focusing on God and thinking about the guidance and the trust that we need to put in him in terms of being leaders, those who will be leaders or are leaders. Thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts? I know it's a lot. And I feel free to ask me to move the slide, to go back and forth between different slides. I can do that. Yes, Kathy.
I like the way he has turned upside down what the qualities of a good leader are. It's not about accumulation of power and riches. It's about staying the hand of the oppressor and safeguarding the rights of the downtrodden. And in the prayer that was read earlier, it's about a government that looks after the weak and the oppressed. And I think this is a redefinition, a redefining of what true leadership is about.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's something that's really beautiful about Baha'i governance, you know, as we see it evolve, this idea of how you know, the local spiritual assembly strives to serve the people of their community, and the ways that they do that is a really great example of what that could look like in the future. Any other thoughts? Let me just stop sharing real quick. On anything, on what we read, or, you know, any final thoughts? I know we're going to be wrapping up in the next 5 minutes or so. So if you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share on any part of the program. Shegun?
I know earlier Sue had mentioned something about the inherent nature of us. And I ran into this quote from the Hidden Word. It said, O son of spirit, noble have I created thee, yet thou hast abased thyself. Rise then unto that for which thou wast created. That's Arabic number 22. Also dealing with the same thing. O son of spirit, I created thee rich. Why does that bring thyself down to poverty? Noble I made thee, wherewith does that abase thyself? Out of the essence of knowledge I gave thee being. Why seekest thou enlightenment from anyone besides me? Out of the clay of love I molded thee. How does that busy thyself with another? Turn thy sight unto thyself, that thou mayest find me standing within thee, mighty, powerful, and self-subsistent. The point I'm trying to make about that is more of this. Yeah, we were created, you know, noble, but many of the time we made the choice, which is part of the conversation. We decide on what we want to do. So if I choose not to be noble, then I can't tell myself to be a good person because of the choice I've made. So that's the point I was trying to make the other time, that it's important. Yeah, it's true, but it goes to some of the conversation, how we may try to avoid some responsibility by certain things we do or not to do. So I think it's important, if we are going to guide ourselves by the you know, by the what Baha'u'llah told us, I think we have to abide by the standard it's giving us rather than our own standard, because it's as human beings, we always want to change the standard. So, and I think that's the point I was trying to make earlier, that yes, we have been created noble, but God gave us the choice to be good or not, choose to be good or not to be good. And I think that's where, when I make the choice not to be good, then I can't claim to be, you know, a good or nice person, because, you know, I've already abased myself. So that's the point I was trying to make.
Thank you for clarifying that, Shegun. And for sharing that quote.
Thank you.
Any final thoughts?
Well, I'm just thinking of the quality of humble to be humble. Generally, when we think of leaders, I don't think of humility. I think of actually arrogance and superiority, a sense of superiority that we think our leaders are superior to us. Whereas perhaps as the quality of humbleness is acquired by the choices we make to humble ourselves, not only with each other, but in the eyes of God, to humble ourselves so that we're less arrogant. We don't think we know everything, but God knows everything, and to turn more to God. It seems like the leaders that Baha'u'llah is talking about in these tablets you chose will have to be humble. They'll have to be humble. And if we are selecting our leaders, we have to acquire appreciation of that quality and choose that quality. Choose people who are humble.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for pointing that out. This idea of humbleness and humility is interesting. Chuck? And I think Chuck will be the last comment, and then we'll wrap up.
Not the last one. I wanted to thank you so much for this presentation, Liz, and for all the comments we've had today. It's been really, really great to hear. And all I was going to add is, in my own personal life, as I said earlier, I know that I engage in willful ignorance. And for me, I call it the stupid room. In my head, in my heart, I have a stupid room that I go into. Sometimes I get locked in there. Sometimes I just have one foot over the threshold. But I think regardless of how educated someone is or what their experience is, for whites, we seem to have this stupid room somewhere in our house that we can fall into. So I pray, this is my prayer,